My name is Avery Morgan. I'm 30 years old, living in a quiet town just outside Dallas, Texas. Every morning, I brew a cup of black coffee, watch the first light slip through the kitchen window, and head to my office downtown. I'm a senior strategist at a major investment firm, a role that sounds impressive on paper but means little at home. From the outside, the Morgans look like the perfect American family. A white house with green shutters, Sunday dinners with polished silverware, polite smiles at neighborhood gatherings. But inside, the truth was always different. I grew up knowing that in my family, love was not unconditional. It was measured, graded silently against another name, Sienna, my younger sister. While I learned to work quietly in the shadows, she was celebrated for every small accomplishment. For a long time, I told myself it didn't matter. Until one night, when everything I had pushed aside came crashing back into the light. Growing up, it was always clear who the star of the Morgan family was, and it wasn't me. From the moment Sienna was born, the house shifted in a way I could feel but never quite explain. It wasn't anger or resentment, not at first. It was something quieter, a pulling away, a gentle recentering around someone else. Sienna was the child with the charm. The girl with the bright laugh, the perfect report cards, the trophies lined up across the living room shelves. My mother, Diane, would brag to neighbors about Sienna's piano recitals or the science fairs she conquered. My father would beam at her every accomplishment like it was the sun rising just for them. And me? I was the reliable one. The one who didn't cause trouble, who managed her own homework, who stayed late at practice without being asked. I learned early that my efforts weren't something to celebrate, they were expected. Necessary. Forgettable. I remember once, when I was 13, winning second place in a statewide essay competition. I rushed home, the certificate still warm in my hand. I placed it carefully on the kitchen counter, hoping someone would notice. My mother glanced at it as she walked by, offered a distracted, "That's nice, Avery," then moved on to help Sienna pick out a dress for her upcoming recital. That was the first time I realized applause in our house wasn't free, it was reserved. Still, I kept trying. In high school, I juggled part-time jobs and AP classes, quietly stacking scholarships in hopes of lightening the burden for college. I didn't ask for new clothes or weekend trips. I didn't complain when my hand-me-down laptop sputtered through every assignment while Sienna received a brand new MacBook before she even started sophomore year. There were moments I thought maybe, just maybe, hard work would close the gap. When I was accepted into a prestigious business program with partial scholarship, I remember hoping this was it. That somehow, I'd earned my place at the table. But recognition never came. Not a special dinner. Not a framed photo on the mantel next to Sienna's endless awards. Only a nod. A faint, "We're proud of you, too," said between bites of dinner and discussions about Sienna's plans for Ivy League schools. I didn't rebel. I didn't shout. I just learned to shrink my hopes smaller and smaller, until one day, they barely made a sound at all. Because in our family, love wasn't about being enough. It was about being the one they chose to see. By the time I turned 30, life had finally started to feel steady. After years of long nights, missed weekends, and patient, quiet effort, I was promoted to senior investment strategist at my firm, a role I had fought for with everything I had. It wasn't just a job title. It was a piece of proof. That I mattered. That I had made something of myself without applause, without shortcuts, without anyone carrying me. So when the idea came to hold a small gathering to celebrate, I hesitated at first. But my mother insisted. "You should let us host it, Avery," she said, voice warm and persuasive over the phone. "It's time for the family to come together again. Let's make it special." Part of me wanted to believe her. Maybe, finally, they saw me. Maybe things could be different. I agreed. I wired over the money for the catering, decorations, and venue rental at the local country club. I didn't ask too many questions. I wanted to trust them. I wanted to believe. The night of the party, I arrived in a simple navy dress, my hair tucked behind my ears, nerves buzzing under my skin. The country club was beautiful, strings of lights draped across the courtyard, tables dressed in white linens, soft jazz humming through the speakers. My grandparents were there, standing quietly near the bar, smiling when they saw me. For a moment, it felt real. Until it didn't. Just as I was lifting my glass, preparing to thank everyone for coming, my mother stepped up to the microphone. Family and friends, she began, her voice bright and ringing, we're gathered here tonight not just to celebrate accomplishments, but to witness a new beginning. I paused, glass halfway to my lips. She turned to the staircase. And there, descending slowly in a glittering red dress, was Sienna. Beside her, hand in hand, was a man I didn't recognize, a polished figure with a shining watch and a rehearsed smile. My mother beamed. I am so proud to announce, she said, voice trembling with emotion, that our sweet Sienna and her wonderful Andrew are officially engaged. Cheers exploded around the room. Cameras flashed. And I stood there, invisible in plain sight. The party I had paid for, the celebration meant to mark the moment I had fought for, had been hijacked. Turned into Sienna's night. Again. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass. I looked around the room, at the faces clapping, the people who barely knew me, the sister who was once again center stage. Across the crowd, my father caught my eye. He gave a slight shake of his head, a silent warning, don't make a scene. I swallowed hard. The lump rising in my throat wasn't anger. It was the final piece of understanding settling in. This family was never going to choose me. Not truly. Not openly. And no matter how hard I worked, how much I gave, how quietly I stayed in line, there would never be a seat at the table meant for me. That night, in that glittering, golden room, I made a decision. Not to fight. Not to beg. But to finally, silently, walk away. I set my glass down quietly on a nearby table. No one noticed. All eyes were still glued to Sienna and her polished fiancé, soaking in the golden glow that was never meant for me. I thought about confronting them. I thought about walking up to that microphone and saying everything that was clawing at the inside of my chest. But then, something inside me shifted. A deeper voice, steady and clear, whispered, you don't have to prove anything anymore. So I stayed silent. I crossed the room slowly, weaving between clusters of guests who barely registered my presence. As I passed my mother, she barely glanced at me, too busy basking in the adoration directed at Sienna. There it was. The confirmation I hadn't even realized I was still seeking. I stopped by my grandparents for a moment. They looked at me, really looked at me, and in their tired, kind eyes, I saw the only acknowledgement I would ever need. Grandma Helen squeezed my hand lightly, as if to say, it's enough. You're enough. Without a word, I turned toward the exit. The evening air hit me like a soft slap, cool, sharp, and real. I breathed it in deeply, letting the shallow, fake warmth of the country club fall away behind me. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't beg for a sliver of attention that had never been freely given in the first place. I just left. In the parking lot, I paused for a second, looking back at the glowing windows where laughter still echoed. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It just felt distant. Like watching a play I had once believed I was part of, finally realizing I had only ever been an extra, never the lead. I slid into my car, hands steady on the steering wheel. No shaking. No tears. Just a calm acceptance that had taken 3 decades to arrive. As I pulled out of the lot, headlights briefly swept across the facade of the country club, catching Sienna's bright red dress in a flash through the glass. For the first time, it didn't feel like I was losing something. It felt like I was freeing myself. I drove away from the celebration that wasn't mine, the family that never truly saw me, the approval I no longer needed. Somewhere deep inside, a door that had stayed stubbornly ajar for years, waiting, hoping, hurting, finally clicked shut. Not with bitterness. Not with rage. Just quiet, final grace. That night, without fireworks, without confrontation, without even raising my voice, I chose something more powerful than revenge. I chose myself. And in that choice, I found the kind of peace no spotlight could ever offer. I hadn't even made it halfway down the drive when I heard it, the sudden shift in the noise behind me. Not laughter anymore. Not applause. A crackling undercurrent, sharp and unsettled. I slowed but didn't stop. I wasn't part of that world anymore. Still, through the trees and the heavy evening air, voices floated toward me, raised, fractured, unraveling. Later, my grandparents would tell me what happened. Andrew, the man Sienna had proudly paraded across the room, wasn't as naive as everyone had assumed. Apparently, in the weeks leading up to the party, he had started noticing things. Whispers about the event. Odd comments from extended family. Inconsistencies Sienna couldn't quite explain. He hadn't come tonight just to celebrate. He had come to see. And he had seen enough. Just after I slipped away, Andrew had approached the microphone himself, interrupting Sienna mid-conversation with a group of family friends. I was under the impression, he began, voice steady but cold, that tonight was meant to celebrate Avery's promotion. That's what I was told. That's what many of us were told. The room had gone unnervingly still. Sienna had laughed it off at first, brushing his words aside with a wave of her manicured hand. But Andrew didn't laugh. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to an old email chain forwarded by a mutual friend, an invitation clearly marked, celebrating Avery Morgan's promotion. He looked at my mother next. "Diane," he said, voice sharper now, "is this how you support your eldest daughter? By erasing her to spotlight another?" A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Whispers snaked through the crowd. Sienna, face flushed with anger and embarrassment, snapped, "Why are you making a big deal out of this? It's not like Avery even cares." "She left, didn't she?" Andrew's expression hardened. "Maybe she left because she's had a lifetime of being pushed aside," he said quietly. He turned back to the crowd. "I don't know about the rest of you, but I can't pretend this is normal. Or right." With that, he set his champagne glass firmly on the nearest table and walked out, leaving Sienna standing alone in the middle of the country club, under a chandelier that suddenly seemed much too bright. It didn't end there. As the party unraveled, more uncomfortable truths surfaced. An old family friend, after too much wine and too little patience, muttered just loudly enough for others to hear that it wasn't the first time Diane Morgan had favored one child so openly. Whispers about favoritism, about old wounds, about scholarships that were promised and quietly redirected, stories buried for years, began to surface. My grandparents, who had watched the spectacle unfold with heavy hearts, didn't say much. They didn't need to. The truth was doing what decades of silence could not. It was breaking through. In the fallout of Andrew's exit, the party began to disintegrate. Guests who had once circled eagerly now lingered by the walls, whispering behind half-covered mouths. The polite sheen that had coated the night peeled back, leaving behind an awkward, heavy air. Even the soft jazz seemed to stumble, the music no longer able to mask the fracture splintering through the room. Sienna stood frozen for a few moments, desperately scanning the crowd for support. But no one stepped forward. Not even my mother. Diane's face had gone pale, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the back of a chair. She opened her mouth to speak, to retake control of the narrative somehow, but before she could, another voice cut across the room. It was my grandmother. Grandma Helen didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. When she spoke, the room listened. "I think," she said slowly, her words slicing through the tension, "it's time we stop pretending this is just about a party." All eyes turned to her. "For years," she continued, "we've watched favoritism eat away at the heart of this family. We stayed silent, hoping it would heal itself. We were wrong." My grandfather moved to stand beside her, his hand steady on hers. "3 months ago," he said, voice firm but sad, "we updated our will." A collective murmur rippled through the guests. Diane stiffened visibly. Sienna's jaw tightened. Grandma Helen glanced around the room, then spoke directly to my parents. "We decided that everything, our home, our savings, the family trust, would go to Avery." Dead silence. It wasn't said out of spite. It wasn't a punishment. It was a recognition. Not because she asked, Grandpa added, but because she never did. Because she stood on her own when no one else stood with her. Sienna let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, but it crumbled quickly into something closer to a whimper. She turned toward my mother, seeking backup, but Diane remained frozen, her face blank and unreadable. Someone coughed awkwardly. A few guests began quietly gathering their things. The facade was gone. The family image they had worked so hard to project had shattered, not with a bang, but with the quiet, devastating collapse of truth finally spoken aloud. Grandma Helen's eyes softened slightly as she looked toward the door, where I had disappeared minutes earlier. "You don't lift people up by standing on someone else's back," she said. "And you don't build family on silence and sacrifice." One by one, relatives began filing out, leaving behind the glittering decorations, the untouched champagne, the remnants of a night meant to celebrate a different kind of success. Sienna collapsed into a chair, her engagement night crumbling in her hands. My mother stood rigidly nearby, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. My father looked everywhere but at her, his posture sagging under the weight of exposure. Outside, the night had turned cooler. The wind carried away the last notes of music, leaving only the sound of leaves rustling against the pavement. Inside that country club, where once there was carefully rehearsed celebration, now there was only silence. A silence louder than any accusation. Sharper than any shouted word. And somewhere far from that place, I was driving through the dark, not running away, but finally heading towards something that had always been waiting for me. Freedom. I didn't look back as I drove. Not once. The road ahead was dark, lit only by the thin white lines stretching into the distance and the occasional street lamp blinking past like soft markers of a new beginning. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for an apology that would never come. I wasn't bracing myself for the next slight, the next moment of being pushed aside. I was simply moving forward, without permission, without needing anyone to validate my worth. The next morning, I woke up in my small apartment downtown to the quiet hum of the city below. No messages from my parents. No frantic calls from Sienna. Just the steady, reassuring silence of a life no longer tethered to theirs. I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world stir awake. And in that simple moment, something inside me settled. Over the next few weeks, the remnants of that night at the country club trickled back through mutual friends and whispered conversations. Sienna and Andrew had officially broken off the engagement. My mother had tried to smooth things over with the extended family, but the cracks were too deep, too visible now to patch. They had lost control of the story. Because for once, the truth had spoken louder than appearances. My grandparents reached out often, gentle and steady as ever. There were dinners at their cozy house, late-night talks over cups of tea, long walks down familiar streets. They never pushed me to explain or to relive what had happened. They simply welcomed me, with no expectations, no comparisons, no conditions. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to reclaim parts of myself I didn't even know I had given away. I worked harder at my firm, not out of desperation to be noticed, but out of a quiet pride in my own growth. I built friendships rooted in honesty, not performance. I allowed myself to dream without immediately calculating how to justify it to someone else. I learned that love, real love, isn't something you earn by shrinking yourself. It's something that exists because you exist. One Sunday afternoon, sitting across from my grandparents at their kitchen table, my grandfather said something I'll never forget. "You always thought you had to fight to be seen, Avery," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "But the ones who truly see you? You don't have to fight for them." I looked at him, then at Grandma Helen, who smiled back at me with that same steady warmth she'd given me since I was little. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. I didn't need the family who had measured my worth against someone else's shine. I didn't need the spotlight they had so easily snatched away. I had built something better, something unshakable. A life. A self. And that was more than enough.